My philosophy is try things out on yourself first before you try to sell it to other people. Having control of the process and learning on yourself is efficient. I mean, if you're in the building industry, which I think is what our audience here, not be scared of making the step into high performance construction and learning the process and learning that it's really not that much more effort.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Design Development, your hub to learn direct from top performers in real estate development, design, and construction. I'm your host, Renz Hayes, founding partner of H&O, lifelong learner, and I am personally obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time listening, thank you so much for tuning in, and if you're a returning listener, welcome back. Let's go. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Patrick Haydon. He is the pioneer for mass timber in the greater Boston area. He is a developer. He runs the construction company that I just mentioned. But he came to us a few years ago and said, we really want to develop this as a 7-story mass timber building. We can get rid of the podium, keep it under high rise. We need to figure out how to do this. Are you guys in? Led us to be able to develop 11 East Lenox, which has become the poster child for mass timber in the greater Boston area. So we're going to learn about that story and more about Patrick. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Patrick. Patrick, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. My name is Patrick Haydon. I'm a founder and owner of Haycon, a building construction company, sort of design build construction company in Boston. We focus on middle market multifamily housing. For the most part, 10 to 50 apartments or condominiums, mostly apartments. We're very much focused on sustainable construction techniques, passive house, and low carbon construction techniques. And that's kind of us in a nutshell. We're very nimble. Haycon is a very nimble kind of construction company. We have what we call our tool chest. We're able to do a good few things with our resources, and like one thing is we have a central facility here in Boston, which is helpful with land where we can keep materials and so forth. We can self-perform a good few aspects of construction if need be, finish carpentry, building cladding, air sealing, which is important in the passive house stuff. We have a sister company that does site work, which is very helpful in construction because that's a big risk, and having control of that aspect of construction is very helpful.
Yeah, that's a huge lever. There's a ton of risk and schedule that goes along with
exactly.
That when you understand the dirt.
And just knowing the ins and outs and the nuts and bolts is very important in general in construction, but especially in that aspect of it.
And honestly, from working with you guys, you have an outstanding team, and I would say like partnership is at the top there. Like the collaboration across the entire design and development team when you partner with Haycon is pretty awesome. So if you're in the greater Boston area and you're looking at that, he said multifamily, typically 50 units, give or take, is a great sweet spot. So reach out.
Absolutely.
Diving a little bit into your past, and if you look on your LinkedIn page, you're an architect, you're a builder, and you're a developer, right? So you're kind of bridging everything.
Correct, yeah.
And you started your career in architecture. What drew you to architecture before going into Haycon?
Well, I actually grew up in central Kentucky in the construction industry. My father was big into construction. He's an electrician, HVAC contractor, and ultimately had several businesses in the construction industry: electrical contracting, HVAC contracting, HVAC supply, and general building materials supply. So I just grew up around that stuff. I just sort of learned about osmosis, and that led me into architecture. I think I was more of a nuts and bolts than artistic when it comes to architecture. Gotcha. So I chose the BAC because it was one of the schools that Boston Architectural College here in Boston, because it was one of the schools that didn't really require that artistic background. It was funny because once I got into the school, I actually was pretty good at that part of it, but I never practiced much art before.
What kind of led you towards architecture instead of sticking to construction right out of the gate?
I think my initial plan was to go to an architectural program, get licensed, and potentially go back and use that in the family business. And so much time passes, you just kind of change your path. So I was stuck here in Boston.
All right. And how many years did you practice architecture for?
Well, at the BAC, you practice while you're going to school. So from 2001 to 2006, 7-ish, I was working in
Oh, cool.
two different architecture firms, Baker Design Group first, and the architectural team. Between that 6 or 7 years.
That's really great experience. And so, so for 6 years, you're working as an architect and you're getting your architectural degree. What changed in like your heart or your vision for your career when you pivoted back to construction? And first, was it just purely construction, or did you do development too?
Yeah, so I was always interested in development and learned as much as I could about development while working at the architectural firms, especially TAT. They're a big housing developers architect, as you well know, and we myself and a partner bought a building in 2006 and renovated it, and sort of as a side gig. We hired a contractor and renovated it, and that went well. So the next year came around, and we actually had an opportunity to do two more very similar buildings, and we needed a third partner, who is one of my partners currently, Will Avanesian, and he was like, well, I'll invest, but you have to be the contractor. So, I had experience of being a contractor before, back when I was in Kentucky, but not really here, so I was a little bit experienced, but so we bought this building, these two buildings, actually wound up being three. We found a third one sort of in the same area, and I left the architectural team just to renovate these buildings. This was like middle of 2007. Everything was great in the economy. I was like, well, I'll just see how it goes after this, because I kind of was looking to make a shift. It'd been like 3 years I'd been there. I felt like I was kind of plateauing in that firm. Maybe I would switch anyway. So we bought these buildings. I renovated them in the short period of time it took us. We renovated 2 row houses in over the summer, in like 65 days, I think. We renovated these 2 row houses, and in that period of time, the entire economy just tanked, and so we had to just keep. I would just, between development projects, which proceeded to be 3 or 4 more small projects, I just kind of did drafting gigs, and I was actually an FHA 203K home consultant inspector, because a lot of people were using those back then. And then I would just kind of make ends meet, do a development project, renovate small projects here and there. And then as the economy picked up, 2009, we started to do for-service contracting for other people that needed small, 3 families and
Very
so forth.
cool. Yeah, so the development world really brought you into construction.
That's right.
Which is actually probably the reverse way of what I thought, but it makes a ton of sense. Architectural background, such a cool experience. Like a lot of times when I think of architecture, particularly in Boston, right? Like the zoning, the building codes, understanding what you can do in each neighborhood gives you an edge when you're looking at a piece of property, because you have a better sense of what can you get out of that piece of dirt, right?
Yeah.
Like not all pieces of dirt are created equal. Like if it's currently a 3-family, but you are confident that you're going to be able to fit a 9-unit building and get that through the neighborhood and the zoning, you've created opportunity there, right? Yeah. And you can offer more money for that land.
Exactly. It's also very helpful as a building contractor, because you can relate to architects who you deal with. Like, you can understand what they're thinking. That's helpful. It's probably also some downside to being an architect and a contractor. Just as far as...
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting. What's something that you learned or something that you know now as a developer and a contractor that you wish you knew as an architect?
Oh my gosh. It's, so many things. When I put in my first kitchen cabinets, like physically put them in, I was like, I was 10 times better at being able to draw a kitchen. And you know where to put filler panels and how things fit. And as time passes, it's an infinite experience of the process in the field that ties back to the design. So that's one thing we're very helpful at, I think, and talented at, is being able to plan for those I think you've experienced us being integrated into, like we had 11 Lease Linux, very integrated in the planning process, thinking about how we want to construct the building, detailing it, etc., and providing that input. So I think that just the process of putting things together in the field.
Yeah,
That's it.
that iterative process and having like a contractor bought in as a partner early on. I think what's helpful with you is you tend to be on both the ownership and the contractor side, which gives you like a very, it's a trusted voice in the room, right?
Exactly.
And so like you have an immediate sense of authority in those conversations, and it becomes like a very seamless process, and where we make the outcome, I think, is far better when we can be collaborative.
Absolutely.
At conception.
Absolutely. It's 100. The experience, the outcome, the value, it's all better. And it's in the industry, as you well know, it's kind of rare at this point.
It can be, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's unfortunate. But
And we could probably have an entire podcast talking about the causes that lead to that type of behavior, right? A lot of times it has nothing to do with, hey, I drew it this way and the contractor has an idea here. And then it's like, well, who's benefiting from that? Are you saving money, or is the owner saving money? And I'm already over budget because I've been doing a lot of rework and scope creep right over here. So I don't have any time to go back and change that. So my answer is you got to keep going.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Do what I drew because I'm not redrawing it.
Exactly.
And it's a tough, when you're playing from behind, right? Like there's not good alignment to start a project. That's where like most of those headaches come from.
We're working on we made the commitment to move into high performance buildings passive house 4 or 5 years ago, and that actually led us into the affordable world, because a lot of the affordable housing is getting built more high performance than market rate, and so a lot of those affordable deals will work on pre-construction with the owner for a fee, but we still have to go. It still has to go competitive bid for the.
So you get hired for pre-con services, but it's still competitive after that service.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Which gives you a leg up, but it's frustrating.
Yeah, it gives you a leg up. I mean, if you're
What's the connection there between affordable and passive house? How do those two go together?
my understanding is in the low-income housing tax credits, they get preference. They get moved to the top of the list if they are passive house. So
it's kind of speed to approval.
it's just a matter of I think their funding it's much more likely to get funded as a passive house, is my understanding.
Very interesting. And that's all a good segue. So something that you see probably out of Haycon, honestly, from my seat, I see you guys as a leader in sustainable construction and passive house construction. It's clearly something you're passionate about. So how do you get that done in today's world? You do a lot of your own developments and you're building these things. So from an ownership side that says like, hey, I can't really build sustainably because it's not economical. I got to make my projects pencil, right?
Yeah.
They have to be economically viable. So as an owner and the contractor, like how do you look at and justify the added cost to design sustainably?
Well, if you look at a multifamily building, it's 20 to 50 unit building. It's typically a pretty big box. And in order to make that big box more thermally efficient and energy efficient, it's pretty simple. You add an inch or so insulation to the walls, exterior insulation. You put in better windows, and you put in more insulation on the roof. If you're building a single family house, that's a lot more effort, and it's a lot more cost of those aspects, because it's a lot more building envelope to humans, and it's
Sure.
So it's not that much. And then there's the air sealing, and the ventilation is kind of a new thing to the building industry, but it's not that new, and that's a little bit of a. So I honestly don't know how much the premium is, but I think it's not. I think it's certainly well worth the effort. So David and I were in Sweden 5 or 6 years ago to tour with this company called Cerneki, which is a small version of Skanska. They do development and building, and just in Sweden in general, they build much more thermally efficient. It's fascinating because they build everything with concrete, so it's like kind of counterintuitive. I'm sure they're using mass timber now, but like it was massive
They're
concrete
carbon
buildings that they
footprint.
just put a ton of insulation on, proper windows. And when we looked at it, we're like, it's just the process. Like if you know how to do these few steps and change the way you do it, it's not any different. And we said, well, the world is going to change to be this way, so we might as well just start doing it, and then we're going to be better at doing it, which better.
When it becomes a requirement, right? It's just a part of your
Exactly.
everyday. You're using it as leverage right now. That's interesting to hear that really the difference between like current practice and really like a high level or sustainable building is a few inches of insulation, upgrading your windows, and I guess the insulation on the roof.
And
You do those three things, and then air exchange,
sealing, yeah,
right?
and air exchange, air sealing, and that's one thing. The podium buildings, the structure, the conductivity of the structure is somewhat challenging when you get into steel buildings. It may be a step above. Like, I think we use the wood frame walls at 11 East Lennox, which is not going to be allowed in the future code. And I think we said that if we used metal framing in that wall assembly, it would probably increase the insulation by another inch or two because of the conductivity of the framing.
Yeah. And is this, I know we're going to dive into 11 East Lennox and that whole project as well, but I believe you used a product called Armor
That's
Wall.
right. Yeah.
Is that the type, because of that extra inch or two of insulation, is that where a product like Armor Wall really comes to benefit?
It really boils down to what you're looking to use for cladding, right? If you can get by with a lighter, like a clapboard type of. So the most efficient way to build a passive house wall, cost-wise, is to use the framing, the weather barrier on the sheathing, some sort of mineral wool insulation of 2 to 3 inches. I typically see. They'll put then that's 100% continuous, and then you put strapping over the insulation to hold the insulation on, and then you put siding on that. That's like the most cost-effective way to do it. But if you're looking to use a more substantial cladding product like terracotta, we like to use fiber cement. BPDA is not going to allow much clapboards in Boston. So when you're looking to use something a little more substantial in weight and so forth, that's when Armor Wall comes in, because you don't have to use that horizontal piece to hold the vertical piece. You eliminate a piece of the building, and you eliminate a revolution around it as far as installation goes.
Yeah.
So if you're doing clapboards if you're doing terracotta or something with a rain screen system that has a substrate, Armor Wall is terrific. Yeah.
Armor Wall is terrific. And for those unfamiliar with the product, and Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, your typical insulation doesn't really have any structural property. We're not talking building structure. We're talking within like the facade connection elements. So when you attach your facade, your exterior through the insulation, you have to hit the studs behind the insulation, correct? And then with Armor Wall, they have some structural capacity you no longer have to line up a screw with the stud. You can just screw the exterior facade panel right into the Armor Wall insulation product.
Correct. And when you're dealing with the former, when you have standard exterior insulation, then you have to use a horizontal element that screws to studs, and then that element should really be fiberglass and not steel, because they say that like a traditional. A few years ago, we were seeing a lot of buildings being built with the R6 minimum. I think that's like an inch or so of mineral wool, and then you use galvanized steel to hold it there. And they say the effective R value of that, by the time you factor in the steel, is like 2.
Very
so
cool.
like you save a lot of thermal connections.
And going back to the intent of the conversation here is sustainable design is going to have a massive impact on this industry moving forward. And it's honestly not that much of a premium to achieve now. My intuition is that a building that's constructed and designed sustainably today is going to have greater property value in a 5 to 10 year window than a building that was not designed sustainably. It's going to have more upside in terms of asset value.
100%. And not to mention the stick aspect of the things like Berto and Hall 97 in New York. Like, if you build the building inadequately and you have to fix it in 10 years to correct its energy performance, that's even worse.
Exactly. That's the angle I'm coming at. I mean, it seems like that reducing our carbon footprints needs to be a focus for all of us.
So in Massachusetts has an awesome program through Mass Save, the Passive House incentive, and the way they structured that is brilliant. In that they give you a subsidy to do a feasibility study, and so a lot of sustainable consultants will size the cost of that feasibility study to the subsidy. It's $5,000. So for $5,000 that you get from the state, you get a lot of information about the feasibility study. Will say, all right, here's a code building. This is the insulation you need. This is the et cetera. And here is the passive house, and you can compare the two. And typically, like I said, it's not a lot of, when you're dealing with the multifamily building, it's not a lot of additional stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And Haycon positions themselves. I love how you talk about the generational type of builds. You had generation 1, generation 2, and generation 3. Your generation 1 is going back a few years when you were just building your traditional, like by code home or building. And generation 2, and sorry if I misphrased that, generation 2 is this new commitment to sustainable construction and passive house. Now, you talk about generation 3, which is where you're going, which I love that you're putting that out there as the net zero building.
So we made this commitment. We were like, all right, let's just change the way we're doing it. Then we already had buildings that were in design, 44 North Beacon, one of them. And so we said, all right, should we make it passive house? It was too far along in design to change. So we said, all right, what can we do to make it better? We used the armor wall. We switched it pretty much to all electric. It does have hot water, gas generated hot water. Did a super high efficiency ERV, and we just made that sort of modification to a code built building, and it made it a lot better. So that's what we would consider our generation 2 or 1. I think we did 42 North Beacon and a small 4-family building. I can't think of the address, in Washington Street, 28. We've done so many buildings on Washington Street. 2837 Washington Street. It's cool. It's a 4-unit building, and on that one we didn't energy model it, but we put very robust exterior insulation, and we used it kind of like a model. We tried 4 different claddings and tried to figure out like what's the most labor effective and cost effective materials to get a more robust exterior building. And then generation 2, I'd say, were the passive house buildings that we're building now. So we're on our 3rd. We're completing 2 of our 3 we're doing this year. And then generation 3 would be net zero, which don't really have any in planning yet, but that's our goal.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of like what's the jump from passive house to net zero?
Not exactly. I mean, we explored this at 11 East Lennox, and I think that if we would have put solar panels, you know how it's on a portfolio of buildings, if we would have put solar panels on the neighboring buildings that we own, we could have got that project to net zero. So
yeah,
I think it's going to come down to purchasing, renewable energy and what do they call it? So I think these projects you like purchase the
because from a solar perspective, unless solar panel technology improves significantly, you don't have enough roof area
exactly
to get enough power to make it a zero energy building.
Yeah, we're trying to come up with a program so that we can somewhat incentivize or at least advise our residents of the buildings to sign up for renewable energy, but that's their choice. We'll certainly do it from the common area load perspective.
All right. Love that. And I think now's a good time to transition to our poster child project, 11 East Lennox, Boston's first mass timber building, 7 stories, practically all mass timber. Tell us a little bit about how this project came to be.
So it's ultimately came to be because of the 70-foot high-rise limit that we have in Massachusetts, and we typically have been building podium buildings, the most efficient, cost-effective way to build these 5-6-story multifamily buildings. And we had a site that we thought we could do 7 floors on, and we thought we could squeeze the 7 floors into the 70 feet by using mass timber. The alternative, I think, would have been, and to keep it below high rise, the alternative would have been a post tension podium, probably, which you have very limited suppliers on, contractors, and light frame. And the podiums, I don't like to do. They're obviously the most cost-effective way to do it. Just because it's the starting and stopping. It just integrates a lot of people into the process that were not in 11 East Linux, right? They didn't have really an iron worker.
Yeah.
We didn't have to start. You put up the iron, you wait for the slab. This got to get this. It's just a lot of starting and stopping. So the idea was to eliminate the podium, get one go at putting the structure up, which is super fast, as you know, and get the cool spaces and the 7th floor.
And for context there, a podium, you have your 4 or 5 levels of wood over type 1 construction, which is composite steel or post-tension concrete to cast-in-place concrete. And so what Patrick's referring to there is construction sequencing. Essentially, in Boston, primarily a steel city, so a lot of these, say, 50 units and under are going to be composite steel. You have your steel erector, then you have to place all the slab rebar, and then you have to pour your concrete slab on metal deck at the podium before your wood guys show up. So it's almost like you're building 2 structures. It really is.
It's 2 buildings,
right?
And then when you're working inside the building, as far as the trades go, you're putting all your stuff into a wooden building, and then you go down to the first floor and you're putting it into a steel, and it's just
And then so with mass timber, which is completely manufactured off-site, right? And it's put together like a kit of parts with nails and screws. It's pretty amazing how it goes together. Very limited bolts. Instead of that, you have one team erecting all 7 floors of this building. So we got rid of the podium. You do 7 floors of pure mass timber, and I think there were 5 guys on site each week.
5
and
4 to 6.
5 to 6.
4 to 6.
And they're doing a 4 a week for a 7-story building, right? It eliminates all the other trades out of the critical path, so you can top the building out faster. And what was the estimated schedule savings on that, Patrick? Okay.
It's
about
at least
2
2
months?
months, at least, yeah.
At least, yeah.
We were anticipating a much faster schedule, and because we squoze the floor to floor so much, the coordination of mechanicals took longer. The installation took longer than we anticipated. But all in, I think, let's see, we started in July of last year, and we're going to finish in January of this year, so 16, 18 months.
And so, similar question to the sustainability movement, right? Is why take the leap of faith and try to make the mass timber? Was it because you got the extra floor and you came in under high rise that it just made economical sense? You feel like you paid a premium for this building, but it's going to pan out in the long run because this building's going to be more valuable? Like, what went into the decision making to say, like, we're going to be the trailblazer here and build Boston's first mass timber building?
A big part of it was we owned the land because it was the last piece of a multi-phase development. So there was no, we didn't weigh the basis of the land. So we had a little bit of,
you had a great land
we had a little bit
basis
of
to play
leeway
with.
on the cost. And the 7th floor, getting the 7th floor, we thought was worth taking the risk and just trying something new. We all believe, it will be hard to sort of quantify, but we all believe that it's going to be a very unique product type in the market with the mass timber exposed and all that. So
I agree. And honestly, at H&O, we are huge advocates for mass timber. It's honestly a unique opportunity. Going back to net zero, passive house construction, reducing our carbon footprint, mass timber plays like a really critical role in that over the next decade. And it's a new building type, like you're saying, kind of creates differentiation in the market in an otherwise very mature industry, right? We've been doing the same thing for a long time. So it's
same way.
Same thing, same way. And if we can be on the forefront of a little change there, the opportunities are going to be there. But
I think that the 7 and 8 floor is the sweet spot for the product. Like, it's definitely more expensive than a light frame that you can pretty easily do in the 6th floor, 5-on-1.
5-on-1, it's not going to be cost competitive. You're right.
7 and 8. It's the foundation. I think we just figured this. There was, I think, 50 or 70 less cubic yards of concrete in the because we did the life cycle analysis comparison of the
Yeah.
mass timber first compared to a steel frame building, and it's a lot more. There's a lot more foundation, so
Yes. Yeah, it was it's
much
a
lighter
lighter
building,
building,
exactly.
right? And it allowed us to avoid a more expensive foundation because of that reduction in building weight. We'll share that study, the life cycle analysis. So our teams partnered with it was
Woodworks,
Woodworks,
yep.
right? Yeah, we partnered with Woodworks to do a study to compare the life cycle analysis of a 7-story mass timber building to what this would have been if it was an all steel building. And the results are pretty awesome. So we'll make sure we link that in the show notes.
Yeah, we were hoping to compare both the life cycle analysis, which is purely embodied carbon, which is what we studied. What's the embodied carbon in the two? But we didn't get into the operational carbon, because how much more carbon friendly is a building that uses 85% less energy than one that uses 85% more over its life?
Yes.
And it's a lot, but we didn't get in. We weren't able to get there.
Yeah, if you consider the full length
Exactly.
of the building. And on those models, what duration do you think is a fair way to look
30
at
years
it?
probably. Look at it.
Yeah. They're similar to the depreciation rate
Exactly.
schedule, right? It's probably a similar way to look at it. Very cool. And now that you've done mass timber, any lessons learned you'd share with people that want to consider mass timber on their next development?
I think that the integrated process is critical. Like you probably remember, we worked with MFDS, H&O. We had a very schematic design. We brought with good faith Nordic, ReadyCore, and BLW on the trade. So we integrated the products that we're using, the systems, into the design, and all worked together, coordinated very effectively the mechanical systems, and I think that's critical. And what else? A lot of protection.
The two takeaways there, right? It's not a design bid
No.
build process. Like you can't lay a building out and say, hey, can we do mass timber? Or you don't design a mass timber building and then ask. You don't send it out for bid, because each manufacturer has different species, different manufacturers. You got to have them brought
Yeah,
in
they're going to
at
have
the beginning.
different specifications on beam penetrations. Like it's all engineered together. So
Yeah. The beam penetration is a good point. You mentioned mechanical. It's really like coordinating a concrete
yes,
building,
100%.
right?
I've never done a concrete building, but yeah,
You don't want to be cutting holes for ductwork through beams and CLT slabs out in the field, right? You want those to be clean, laid out, pre-planned, done in a manufactured environment on the CNC equipment. You don't want a guy out there with a Sawzall trying to cut a 5-ply
exactly.
CLT panel.
We had to do we did core all the holes through the panel for the rain leaders and roof rain leaders and plumbing and so forth, and that was actually much more time intensive than I expected. We typically
Wasn't too easy to core through.
it was like we typically core our own concrete cores in the podium buildings in the first and second floor. We just have the
You guys actually used a concrete
we had-
core drill, right? Maybe
no we got a it's a CLT core drill from Rothenblaus. It is. We actually had to put it had a European power cord on. We had to switch the power cord to run it, but they're effective, but they're like chainsaw blades. The drill bits. Once it hits something a little bit foreign, it's basically no good. So that was actually more of a challenge than I thought, and I think that I would potentially try to pre-drill some of those in the future.
in the future. Yeah. And so you're referring the holes you tried to drill were maybe like drain lines or water lines.
for
So you're
all the
talking
plumbing.
about holes that are only a few inches in
Exactly.
diameter.
The smaller
right?
ones weren't a problem. It was the big
Try
3
to-
and 4 inch ones that were a little bit of a challenge.
Got it. Yep. And we're typically, those are going to be in partition walls anyway. So like an imperfect drill, you're never going to see that opening while living in the building. Makes a ton of sense. Any bold predictions you'd share for us in like mass timber or sustainable construction over the next 5 years? What do you see
I think
coming?
sustainable construction, we're going to see a huge pivot. I think that it's just going to become like we were talking about with the affordable housing. it's going to become more and more mainstream and standardized and required. That's no doubt. And I think mass timber will be a very popular structural system in that 7 to 8. I like because you can keep most of the timber exposed, which I think is a good part of it. I think we'll see taller buildings as well, especially from its carbon friendly standpoint. I think that's going to. I think we're going to start to be required to do scorecards on our embodied carbon, which we should be doing. Yeah, I think that I'm a little concerned that the manufacturing is not going to be able to keep up with the demand because
that's the challenge we face right now, right? So mass timber was only approved up until 2021 to be used up to a 5-story building. And what that meant is it was hard to make the numbers work. So you weren't really going to build a 5-story mass timber building. And because you weren't going to do that, there was no suppliers in the area. IBC 2021 adopts mass timber construction up to 18 stories. And now you can start to see all the suppliers starting to flood the market, right? We're seeing more suppliers. We're seeing them ramp up production because the demand is now there. But with that takes time, right? These suppliers can't get up and running in 6 months and start pumping out buildings. So there's some people that like Nordique Structures have been around for a while. I think they built a mass timber plant. Was it 2010?
I believe that's right.
Is that when they started? So they started in 2010, 11 years before high-rise construction approved mass timber. Like they've been in it for a long time. So I think as we see supply increase, you'll start to see more competitive pricing too. That hopefully helps.
I mean, I think what we learned from them is the industry is looking for scale. Like they don't want Linux, they want the T3 in Toronto. They want not 40,000 square feet, 400,000 square feet. They want to make a bunch of the same thing over and over,
which I think that's the efficiency in the mass timber system, particularly CLT. And I would say from their standpoint, where supply is choked, that's probably a good place to focus, right? Because those buildings can be there and there's less competition. So go for it. What should we expect from Haycon over the next 5 years? Are you going to do another mass timber building?
Yeah, hopefully we can make it feasible. It's tough in this market, and it's one of the unfortunate things about 11 East Linux that it's hard to compare what its cost was to the light frame buildings because over the year that we were building it, everything got so much more expensive. So I don't even, don't know what the.
You're not comparing apples to apples.
Exactly. But yeah, we're planning one more with you guys, 8th floor, 88 North Washington, all CLT building. Hopefully we can construct that. And I think that, one at a time is nice because the planning effort, we're not a huge company, so if we can sort of focus on one mass timber building and do a few light frame buildings concurrently, I think that's a good mix for us.
It's a good transition. And like you said, the light frame podium buildings, they're still the most economical way to build housing, which is a massive demand, right? So it'd be silly not to
and you don't have to
going.
spend the effort pre-construction and doing all the coordinating. A lot of that's a lot simpler to coordinate.
If you had one piece of advice for emerging leaders.
One piece, I think it's just one step at a time. Just take one step at a time and my philosophy is try things out on yourself first before you try to sell it to other people. Like when we've done development projects, they've always gotten in more sophistication and scale. Then we're following with services to third-party clients. So we learn. I think that having control of the process and learning on yourself is efficient and gives you the ability to then provide that to other clients if you have that ability. That's something that we're very fortunate to have.
For sure.
And to not be scared.
And people can apply that.
If you're in the building industry, which I think is what our audience here, not be scared of making the step into high performance construction and learning the process and learning that it's really not that much more effort.
Doesn't sound as scary as people make it.
It's
right?
not.
In your example there of trying something out on yourself first, I think that's a good leadership lesson or a takeaway, even for an individual, right? If there's something you want in your career, or like an opportunity that you want in front of you, it's good to put it on, like, take the risk yourself and put it on yourself to develop the skills and the know-how so that you're increasing your probability of success in that next future role, right? Like I think Jim Rohn says is don't people have like the inclination that is like, oh, I'll do this when I get paid X, or I'll do this when I get the promotion. I'll work harder when I'm here. And it's like, the better job's looking for a better you. So become the better you, and the better job comes right after that, right? So work on yourself before you try to sell. I think it's a great lesson. Awesome. So where can people learn more about you, Haycon?
Our website, we have a little bit of a YouTube presence. We don't have a podcast yet, but maybe we'll do that. Instagram,
always welcome
LinkedIn,
here.
all the sort of social media platforms we try to use.
All the social channels.
Or just give us a call and reach out. Yeah.
Love that. Very, very reachable. Patrick, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last 5-6 years. We value your partnership, love what you're doing. You really, you walk the walk, you don't just talk the talk. So, it's great to have somebody like you pushing things like sustainable construction, passive house, and mass timber, and in otherwise very mature markets. So, please join me in thanking Patrick for his time today. Patrick, I wish you the best. Thanks.
All right.
Everyone, can't thank you enough for tuning in today. I hope you got a ton out of today's conversation. And if you could do us one favor, if you did get value, please like, share, and comment. Subscribe on whatever channel you're tuning in on. Please leave a review. It helps us expand and grow and support more people. That's the end goal. We want to bring the insights of these amazing guests to as many people as possible. Thank you.